Zainab, could you just type into the chat box yes if you can hear me so I can make sure that the mic's working okay? Okay, thank you. So the topic of the session is mastery curriculum design. My name's Chris and I've been thinking about curriculum design for probably 5 or 6 years now. And today I want to focus particularly on the concept which has come to be known as mastery curriculum design. But before we can really go into any great detail with that, we need to first focus on that question of what is a mastery curriculum? Because I've come to realize that now this term, mastery curriculum, is being used by various different groups of people, and they all have a different idea of what that means to them when they use it. So it's becoming a little bit of a buzzword. It is a phrase, an idea that is in vogue at the moment, and with that, different people are using it to mean different things. So I need to be really clear about what it is that I mean when I talk about a mastery curriculum. To begin with, I want to look at what's probably the most original definition that I've heard of about a mastery curriculum was. This is the definition that was used by the Education Endowment Fund when they collected their toolkit of evidence, things that work less well. In it, one of the things they talked about was mastery curriculum design, and they were talking about this idea that I'm going to explain now. In a traditional curriculum, the time that you spend on a topic is fixed. And therefore, as a consequence of that, the amount of learning that any individual child experiences is necessarily flexed. If you move on to a new topic before that a particular child has finished learning or mastering that topic, then they just won't learn it. And you end up with a spectrum of people from those who didn't really get anything to those who fully understood it all, and there's variation in that. The aim with the mastery curriculum was to switch that relationship around so that it would become the time which was varied, or the time which was flexed, and instead the learning would be held absolute. So if we need to spend more time on this topic until everybody's understood it, we'll spend more time on this topic. I was at an event recently at a school who also enacts what they would consider a mastery curriculum. And the person speaking asked, what would you need to see from a child in order to be convinced that they had mastered the topic represented by this arithmetic expression here? In other words, multiplying fractions by an integer. And people came up with a range of different answers to that question. They suggested that they would need to see that child be able to visually represent the problem, as well as simply being able to provide the answer, or that they would need that child to be able to explain some sort of reason as to why you would multiply by the top and divide by the bottom. There were a few different answers along this line that were given, and I think they're really interesting because, to my mind, what those people are describing is not, it could be mastery, or it could be something different. What they're describing could be more akin to relational or conceptual understanding. For example, let's imagine that you had a child who didn't know at all how to multiply a fraction by an integer. And then after some instruction and some practice, they reach a point where you could give them 100 such expressions to evaluate, and they could evaluate all of them in only a few seconds per expression. So they could complete all 100 in just a few minutes. If they could do it that easily and with that level of fluency, I've got to ask, can we not say that that child has mastered something? Perhaps they've not mastered everything that there is to know about the concept of multiplying fractions and integers, or fractions and fractions even. But it seems to me that they have mastered something if they've reached that level of proficiency in computation at least. So I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with that particular definition on its own, but I find it interesting to think that some people are coming to view the idea of a mastery curriculum in those terms, with the sense of having a conceptual or strong conceptual or relational understanding of the different topics. The mastery curriculum which I use at the moment, which we adhere to, in it I think the one concept that shines out the most is this notion of depth before breadth. Now, to some extent, this can go hand in hand with the previous idea that I suggested. It might be that through spending much longer on a given topic than is perhaps more traditional, we have the opportunity to explore more of those conceptual representations or the different relationships between the one topic and the other topics that have been studied. But I think this one idea that we do spend longer on topics is absolutely key. So that is all that I'm going to be referring to, at least to begin with, when I'm thinking about what our mastery curriculum is. And that's important because actually, for us, time is still fixed. And therefore, in reality, the amount of learning that each student undergoes is still flexed, it is still varied. However, I think another point which is important to recognize is there is a certain minimum bar above which I would like to think every single child could get over. And I think a lot more work goes into ensuring that every child gets over that bar at least. So, for example, thinking about this expression again, I would expect every child that I teach to be able to multiply 5/7 by 56. I would like as many as possible to be able to do much more than that. But as a bare minimum, I would want every single one of them to perform that multiplication. And if they couldn't, even if we'd moved on to another topic, I'm still going to be singling out who those people are, having an assessment system to recognize who they are, and making sure that, again, more time is spent with them until I feel that they have mastered this idea. This is a very brief overview of everything that I'm going to talk about. And it doesn't look like a great deal. I've broken it down into two overarching concepts. The first one I've already hinted at, but I'm going to go into more depth about what that really looks like. The second one, actually, that is going to turn into lots of other different bits and pieces, which all together could be combined under the heading of just intelligent sequencing of what you select to teach and when you select a teacher. Starting with the first idea then that I've already spoken about, fewer concepts over more time. The image you have in front of you now is taken from a fairly typical GCSE textbook that you could buy today. And in it, there are in excess of 20 different topics. And even if we assume that this textbook was intended for use across Year 10 and Year 11, it really boils down to no more than about 2 weeks worth of lessons per topic. And that's without even accounting for things like revision time in the run-up to the exam, which always come into play. This is taken from another curriculum, which I'm actually a really big fan of, without naming which one it is, because I am going to speak somewhat critically of it. I am a big fan of a lot of the resources that are produced by the people who came up with this curriculum as well. And I love the fact that logic is right there at the top. I think this is a great idea. But again, we have the same problem. We have 22 units in a 39-week year.